and welcome back to Practice Forward. I'm your host, Owen Bush. This is a show about how architects evolve their practice, reuse, sustainability, digital craft, and delivery. And today, Julien Jalbert is joining us from the Knickerbocker Group. How you doing, Julien?
I'm great. Thanks for having me here, Owen. I'm super excited to be here.
Excellent. So you're up in Maine. Knickerbocker Group is primarily focusing on residential projects in Maine. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we have offices in both Booth Bay, which is where I'm sitting today, and also Portland, Maine. And yeah, we focus mostly on high-end residential construction, mostly coastal waterfront properties, which is great. And we also do some kind of commercial stuff. We've done like a country club, construction before. I worked on a restaurant renovation, but yeah, mostly residential is our bread and butter. And we're design build firm too. So we do kind of soup to nuts. We help clients with, real estate as well, finding land. Then we design the dream home. We build the dream home. We even have, in-house caretaker, so property management. So we can also maintain the dream home as well. So we kind of do a one-stop shop, which is great for a lot of our clients.
Excellent. Wow. Okay, so we're about to jump into all this stuff with Julien. But before we begin, I'm going to say Practice Forward is brought to you by Scan to Plan, terrestrial LiDAR and Scan to BIM for architects who need certainty. Tight tolerances, admin-ready models, fewer RFIs, measure what you make, search scantoplan.io. So today, we're joined by Julien Jalbert of Knickerbocker Group. He's an architect who's leading a prefab program for small all-electric homes. And the team runs a really tight ship with sort of a car buying style personalization. They've proved it on projects like Ailing and Lupine, while they're feeding lessons back into their custom work. So we're going to look at how constraints protect craft, and where modeling and automation-free design time, and what grid-optional, self-reliant housing could mean for Maine and other coastal areas like that. So let's jump into this, Julien. So tell me a little bit about how you wanted to become an architect, or what's a space that inspired you in your youth, or coming up, and where did you kind of see, start thinking about constraints in space and the quality that they generate?
Sure. So I grew up in rural New Hampshire, and my dad was a self-taught architect. He didn't go to schooling for architecture. He just kind of fell into it and was attracted to it at a young age. He was also a general contractor too, so he kind of had his own design build firm, in essence, like a one-man show for many years of my life. So I grew up around my dad always having a drafting board around with the May line, hand drawing everything. He did a lot of new construction work in New Hampshire, a lot of renovation work too. So I kind of again was very much kind of seeing how architecture translated from design to reality. He would take me to job sites too when I was a little kid. And I'll never forget, my dad built us a play structure when I was probably like 3 or 4. It was like a fort outside of our house out of picket fence material. He built like a kind of ladder up to a platform. It was almost like a garrison style kind of old school fort. I remember playing in that as a kid and being like, this is so cool. Like, my dad made this, and it's this like cool little structure for me. And that totally sparked in me at an early age. And my mom to this day remembers how as a little kid, I'd always draw houses and be like, can we build this little house that I design? I don't know how to build it, but can you help me figure this out? I have this idea. Here's this layout. Wow. Here's what it looks like. Let's go build it. And she's like, my parents were busy, that she had 2 other kids to take care of too. And my dad was working pretty hard full time, but I always was dreaming about the next playhouse I had to build. And I was just designing a new one regularly. So I think ever since a kid, it seems like it's almost been kind of ingrained in me. Maybe it's a genetic thing passed down just to want to design and build things. So I'll never forget that, being a kid, I always wanted to design a playhouse. And I also remember being in rural New Hampshire, with my brother, always wanted to build more, we called them tree forts, but arguably they were just platforms. We would bring a bucket of nails and hammers and scrap wood and just take a piece of plywood and nail it with a bunch of diagonal braces into a tree, then build them up higher and higher. We had a network of these, platforms we would build just to kind of like occupy a different space, like up high in the canopy of the trees. So that
Yeah.
stuck with me too from being a kid, which was super fun to do.
Wow. And so, I mean, well, that must be a thrill for your dad, and also a thrill for you to be kind of like, actually making like real world grown up versions of these fantasies you had.
Yeah, I would say so.
Yeah. And so, where did you realize, like, okay, let's say, in the progress of your practice, what was a time when you really felt like you started really craving having constraints, or you started feeling like constraints were really the thing that was really going to produce the best work out of you?
Sure. I would say probably, with clients, obviously, budget very much impacts all jobs, right? Like as far as, needing to stay within a certain budget a client gives you. So, as much as it's fun as an architect to design, very creative, beautiful, cutting edge spaces, often, creativity, can push budgets a bit too far if you do something way out there, way crazy, really cool and cutting edge. So I think, early on in my career, I realized like it's cool to propose something really amazing that's kind of like totally wow and be like a very special space. But at the same time, I've always learned to provide options to clients where here's option A, B, C. Option A is this is dynamite. This is a knockout. This is like, crazy cool space with lots of glass, like amazing, materials, you name it. And then option B is similar, but a little less kind of like, intense. And then option C is still cool, but more subdued. So that's one constraint I learned early in my career to really harness was to, try to stick to a client's budget. But also at the same time, at Knickerbocker, we often do kind of try to push the boundaries a bit where you don't want to stay in the very kind of bland, boring lane and just always necessarily hit just right on budget. It's good to obviously hit a budget, but at the same time, it's fun as designers and creatives to kind of like dangle a little carrot of this is cool, this is on budget. Well, what about this over here? This is like a little more money and it's super cool. Like any interest there? And we're often as architects and designers, part of our job is to kind of help clients, realize what that space could be. And if there are monetary implications, like they, if it impacts their life in a positive and meaningful way, they're often ready to go for it, like make that leap. So that's, I think, one of the first constraints I could mention. And then we'll probably talk about this more with the prefab division, but, part of our goal with prefab was to really try to simplify, how we build and really create a replicatable process. And to do that, we found to kind of minimize customization as much as we could and rely more on personalization very much helped with that. Like you said in your intro, where, I equate it to, like buying a car. When you buy a car, you don't ask the car dealer, hey, could you like make the trunk 4 feet longer? They say, no, we can't do that. You can like change the paint color. You can change like the knobs on the, radio. You can like swap this out for that. But like, we can't physically really change the body of the car. That's absurd because that totally messes up our production, efficiencies. So, we came at our prefab division with that kind of mindset of you can get a beautiful house. You can pick pretty much any finish and fixture you can see. And we do make some slight, tweaks upon request if it's going to be a make or break for the client. But we try to really keep clients, to stick to what the design is and just kind of, refine the palette and the, finishes and fixtures they can pick and choose from. So.
Right. So why did you decide to pursue that kind of like in-house factory instead of just, I mean, I talked to a lot of other firms similar to Knickerbocker, and they're really focused on people-centric design, and they're saying, oh, there's no way that you could, have the one size fits all for everyone. And
yep.
So, I mean, how did you guys decide to go in this direction?
Yeah, I think ultimately it was an interesting organic evolution of, our process where it was about 3 or 4 years ago now. I had a sit down kind of meeting with two of my kind of bosses at the time. And, it was a yearly review, frankly, then, where we sit down every year to like do a kind of performance review. And, I think they were pretty happy with my performance to date with the custom jobs I've been doing with, great clients, great projects. And they kind of said, like, you're doing pretty well here. Like, you're, good with clients, good with communication. The end product that you've been delivering has been, pretty stellar. Is there anything you're not doing like that you would want to do? And I said, great question. And when I first interviewed at Knickerbocker 8 years ago, I just wrapped up grad school, and my thesis was in modular construction, where I did a deep dive into prefabrication, volumetric construction. So I said in my interview then 8 years ago, I'd said, like, I think Knickerbocker should consider doing prefab in some way, shape, or form, because it, minimizes waste, reduces time frames. You build things in a controlled environment where they don't see the inclement weather. Like, there's so many benefits to it. I said, has Knickerbocker thought about that? And my then my now kind of boss, but at the time who was interviewing me, Rick Nelson, he said, yeah, we've been like looking at that for quite a while. We're still trying to get our foot in that door, because, like, he said, I'm like you, Julien. He's also an architect. He's like, I'm like you, very much in agreement that prefab is the way of the future. So that was, during my initial interview. Then, 4 years ago, during my yearly kind of review, they asked me, what aren't we doing that you'd like want to pursue? I said, prefab. Like, we got to do this in earnest. Like, how can we do that? So I'm very thankful that, management really kind of gave me freedom to kind of just like start to dive into like what that could mean for Knickerbocker. So we kind of, as a team, with me leading the charge, looked into, like, do we do panelization as a company? Do we do modularization? Do we get our own shop? Do we like work with other shops? Like, how do we make this work? So we kind of evolved. And then back in, I think it was 2023, a new bill got passed in Maine that make accessory dwelling units, ADUs, like much easier for really any homeowner to build on their property. Like, as of right, they can just do it, basically. So the president of our company, Danielle Betts, I think she was, pretty smart to say, let's focus on that. That seems like a smart thing to do, because ADUs are small. Julien, you have a lot of experience in modular. Modular can pretty readily pertain to like small units versus like giant structures. Not to say you can't do modular in bigger units, but we could wrap our hands around something smaller like that. So we kind of went down that avenue and kept pursuing it, where, we realized, we could have maybe our own shop where we build these modular homes indoors that are these ADUs, at a very high level. And, frankly, manufactured housing historically is just built, faster with less waste. It's more efficient, usually at a better price point too, because, like, just a manufacturing environment just, lends itself to efficiencies and time and, cutting down on labor, and et cetera. So, we found it as an opportunity to kind of, help with many kind of issues we were seeing in like the housing market, to build housing faster, to build quality housing. So it was an opportunity for us to kind of, check a lot of boxes that we were trying to, do at Knickerbocker. So.
Sure. So, well, let's talk about some of these prefab ADUs that you guys have been working on. So the one I want to talk about first is called Ailing.
Ailing, I believe.
Ailing.
Yep.
So this is an all electric, I think is it 800 square feet?
Yeah, roughly. Yep. 2 bed, 1 bath.
It's a tiny home, but it doesn't look it when you look at these photos. I mean, part of that is it's got a lot of big windows, but it also looks like it really fits into this Maine vernacular. So it would basically be pretty comfortable in a whole lot of landscapes out there. So it's fully electric. I guess is this a passive home or something close to it?
Yeah, it doesn't meet the passive house standard, but we do our best just to build these homes, well, energy efficient and airtight. So like, performance wise, they do very well, but they're not quite at the passive house standard, which is like the top tier Rolls Royce, because we're trying to balance, because, I think most folks will attest that passive house is amazing, but often like it comes with a price tag where you're doing like 3 times the installation required by code, meticulous.
Yeah, of course.
I love it. A passive house is amazing. I would strive for it on every job, but most jobs where I pitch it to clients, they're like, how much more is that going to be? Yeah, let's just take that down a notch.
Right, sure. Yeah. Well, what's one spec that you really refuse to compromise on with this?
Yeah, for the Ailing, it was spray foam, basically, and foam products. So like as part of, the whole prefab pod, our, ADU division and prefab divisions kind of ethos is, and this is me as an architect, where I read a book about 2-3 years ago now, by Bruce King, I believe. It's called A New Carbon Architecture. And it's basically all about how, energy efficiency is great. We need to push that. That's like for sure something that all designers, builders should be striving to achieve, energy efficiency. However, the energy efficiency that was the big thing from 10 years ago, which everyone was trying to do, and a lot of them achieved, basically, they did so with materials that ultimately were not good for the climate, which actually also kind of hurts
Oh,
more than
right.
help the
Yeah.
environment. Where if you build a house entirely out of like a foam, petroleum-based foam product, right? Like there's a product SIPs, right? A structurally insulated panel. If you built your house out of all SIPs that are foam, that's got a really high embodied carbon, at the
Yeah.
end of the day, great. Your energy bill is $50 a month or whatever. And if that's great, but you dumped so much carbon into this building just to build it, you've now offset
Yeah.
energy use savings for the next 15 years. So it's going to take 15 years to get back to zero. So
Right.
that book, A New Carbon Architecture, is all about, yes, energy efficiency is great, but also use as many renewable, sustainable, recycled materials as you can to try to start out at zero or even negative carbon when you
Yeah.
kick off the kind of project in the home occupancy. So yeah, like ever since the onset of our prefab division, the guys in the shop, rightly so, like I had them stuffing sheep's wool insulation into the window openings around the rough openings because I didn't want to use spray foam. You can go to Home Depot and get a low expansion spray foam can and just, spray it out and it's done in like a minute for every window. But I was like, I don't want to do that. Like, I don't want to use foam or like petroleum derived products. So let's get the sheep's wool. You take a little like putty knife, you stuff it in the windows, and then you like tape around the window, and then that's good to go. So, that was one thing that I, really pushed back on the construction guys who were, looking to find arguably, simpler ways to do it. But I didn't want to budge because I'm very, passionate about and confident that we need to use the right materials for our builds. So.
Right. So, so once you get these things hooked up and plugged in, and people have moved in, and they're getting actual utility bills back, what do those bills validate, and where do you find where were the surprises, and what would you change in version 2?
Yeah. So yeah, Ailing, for example, our client told us that they're kind of dead of winter. I think it was February in Maine, which is like historically very, very cold, one of the coldest months. I think their highest bill they told us was like $79 a month, roughly. And then the summer they said it was like $25 a month. And as you mentioned, these are all electric, so that's heat. So we do ductless mini splits for heating and cooling, heat pump water heater if there's a basement available. We use electric ERVs for mechanical ventilation, all electric appliances, electric stove, electric lighting. So it's all electric. So, that's a pretty decent, it's a great electric bill. And considering that's the only utility they pay in my mind, like I live in a 1943 Cape in South Portland, Maine, that I've been slowly renovating over the years to make more efficient. But I probably spend $1,500 a winter on oil on top of, $250 a month electricity, because I got a heat pump too to kind of supplement. So I'm like, $500 a month in the winter, for utilities, and I'm more like $200-300 in the summer. So it's not cheap,
Yep.
So as far as what did that, validate, I think it validated that we did a pretty good job with our thermal envelope and with our air sealing practices. I think, what it makes me strive to want to do better, I think, is to continue to improve that thermal envelope, because you can always, do it better. I think one of the challenges I found as an architect with modular and getting a continuous air barrier, that can be a bit tricky as far as how you sequence materials and how to because these are two halves of a house coming together, and then how to ultimately, stitch it all up and make it super, super perfectly airtight. So that's one thing I'd like to, and will continue to improve on with future iterations, is how to, really tighten up that air barrier. We did well on this first Ailing, which is our first Astra unit. That was a 2-bed, 1-bath. We can always do better, so that was one thing I like to try to, continue to improve upon, is the air sealing.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you guys, I'm happy to hear, Julien, that you've got high energy bills as well, because I always get a little ashamed when I'm talking to you tight house guys about like how loose my house is. But it sounds like my bills are pretty similar. So, okay, so there's another design here, Lupine, and you've got Lupine 1 and 2. Biophilic design. What does that mean?
Yeah, so Lupine was our prototype. So that was our first unit we built, and that's our 1-bed, 1-bath model that we offer. And biophilic in that, we're really trying to maximize, the amount of natural light in the building, really help the homeowner, really engage with nature. In that, like, for example, in our modern Lupine model with the bedroom, we've got basically 9 feet of glass, like, like with windows, operable windows and fixed glass going to the corner of that bedroom where you have 9 feet of glass, on one wall and another 9 feet of glass on the perpendicular wall. So basically, like, there's almost no wall like in front of you as you wake up in the morning, and
Right.
same as the living space. Like we have a 12-foot sliding door that's, so we tried to maximize, natural light and kind of tying to the outdoors. So when you're sitting inside, whether it's, up in bed reading a book, waking up in bed, or like sitting at the couch in the living space, like you can almost feel like you're outside. Like basically like your view shed is like almost all glass looking outside. And those are triple glazed windows from Europe. So they're super energy efficient. And, so they very much help with, thermal comfort, so that's kind of, where we're going with the biophilic design. Also, as mentioned previously, we're trying to use as many like, local, renewable, sustainable materials as possible, wood-based products. I mentioned sheep's wool insulation. We have like a hemp wood flooring option, which is pretty cool. We use wood fiber insulation made right here in Maine, which
These
is
are
awesome.
these are fully constructed, so you just drop them in on a crane, huh?
Pretty much, yeah. The Lupine itself, in particular, that's our 1-bed unit, is one module. The Aster, also the Ailing that you mentioned, is an Aster, is 2 pieces. But the Lupine, especially the modern unit, comes pretty much like it's almost done. Like basically, it's a 16-foot by 34-foot wide module that ships down the road as 1 piece. And our show model, that Lupine 1, when it went down the road, it was shrink wrapped to protect the windows, the siding, and stuff. When that shrink wrap peeled off, it's almost like what you see on the website photos. It's like the siding was on, the windows were trimmed out, all the doors and windows were all in. Like the only things we had to put on in the field on the exterior were that little metal awning roof, that delicate metal awning roof on the front. We had to kind of hook up some of the light fixtures that were otherwise hanging out too far, to ship. And we basically set the thing on the foundation. We had our set crew come and like put a bunch of screws and plates on to anchor to the foundation. We trimmed out like 1 water table trim piece to kind of hide that connection between module and foundation. And then, we had the electrician, plumbers, et cetera, get under the crawl space, tie in the plumbing, hook up the electrical, and with a matter of weeks, it was done. So, the goal was to make it, to our best of our ability, a plug and play scenario where you could like drop this thing off, and within a matter of weeks, with the, labor on site to kind of do the finish and fit out, it was like pretty much done. Like on the inside of the building, for example, the flooring was in, it was like fully finished, painted, all the cabinets were in, all the light fixtures, plumbing fixtures were in, even like the toilet paper holder was installed, all that stuff, So it was literally, I think the only thing to do on the inside pretty much were like a few touch-ups where like there's 1 drywall crack when it shipped. They just kind of caulked that, repainted that, and they had to hang the shower door. It was like a sliding glass shower door. But like other than that, this thing was like done, like ready to go. So it's pretty cool.
So when you guys first had it built and people started coming in and using it, was there anything that people did inside the space that sort of contradicted what you imagined, and that any details you needed to redesign for that?
Yeah, I'd say a couple things. First off would be the roof system. So the ceiling in Lupine 1 has a very slightly sloped ceiling. So what we did there was we basically, if you look at the exterior kind of photos, you can tell that there's like a bit of a slight slope of the roof, right? We didn't want it to be a fully flat roof because that's not best practice for shedding water and stuff like that. So we get a very, very slight slope roof. It's got an EPDM, so a rubber roof. And what we did was we basically made the ceiling framing and the roof framing one and the same. So basically we took, that very slight pitched roof system and then like just applied the ceiling finish to the underside. So you can see from the photos a very slight slope. So, we thought that was a cool detail. At the time, it did to some extent make the construction simpler. We didn't have to like build down a flat ceiling, but a lot of clients walk through and we're kind of like, oh, is the ceiling, wait, is the ceiling sloped? Oh, wait, it is, because it's so minimal. Like they couldn't almost tell. They're like, oh, interesting. Okay. So that wasn't like enough of a feature to be like a cathedral ceiling where it's so high and spacious and like a drastic, beautiful detail. So that's one thing. We've since ultimately, again, through this feedback loop from clients mainly and from our production facility, realized let's just build like a box with a flat ceiling and a flat roof, and then build the sloped section on top of it to pitch water, because that makes for a much more efficient assembly in our shop. So we made that change a few months ago after kind of like thinking through it more critically, like, is that little mini slope like worth the kind of additional labor to like make all those kind of, structural details work out? And the short answer was no, let's just make it a flat ceiling, and we'll tell our clients that.
It seems like the kind of thing that's it's so close to being flat that it might be a little bit logically unsettling, right? It's
right, exactly. It's kind of like, is it flat? No, it's not. I can see the slope. So it's like, yeah. Another thing that interestingly, I think we've historically now seen, we've probably given, I don't know, 100+ tours now of the Lupines. That's our show model that will, invite prospective customers to come and tour. One thing that I think like so many clients don't realize is that 500 square feet, although on paper it's not very big, what clients don't understand until they see the Lupin is that like our model, because of all the glass we've used, does not feel small. So like so many clients will say, oh, the 500, yeah, you can give me a tour of that one. Do you have an 800? So we don't have the larger Aster for a tour. We only have the smaller unit because the idea was that like our Lupin and Aster, we have similar finish selections you could pick and choose from for either model. So we thought, build the small one. We can have people tour that. They can see the kind of cabinetry, flooring, touch and feel, everything. But we've had folks ask, like, can we tour an Aster? Long story short is Ailing was our first paying client that built an Aster. So we don't really want to give tours, to someone's private home. So, however, clients often say, well, 500 square feet, that's too small. We couldn't live in that, well, but 800 maybe. But then they tour the 500 and often they go, oh my God, like, wow, this is a lot bigger than I thought it would be. This feels so spacious. Like maybe we could live in 500 feet, honey. Okay. Like they're like looking at each other. This is not as, compact as I thought. So like by way of design and, again, maximize natural light, large glass, it doesn't feel small basically. So like on paper, clients think like, we couldn't live in that space, but then they tour it and they're like, holy smokes, we could live here. This is amazing. So that's one thing we've noticed too.
Interesting. So, now, was there anything that, any sort of tolerances that failed when you first fabricated it, and then were you fixing it in the factory, or are there field workarounds? How do you get around anything like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. As far as field tolerances, I would say maybe our Aster, our 2-bed unit, is one that's got the two pieces that come together to make a whole, basically. So once you get into modular homes that have multiple pieces, that is for sure where tolerances become a much bigger consideration. Like our Lupin, for example. Thankfully, it being one piece, like it was pretty smooth sailing, man. Like we set that thing on the foundation, like we obviously did all the legwork in advance to make sure the foundation was the right size, got it all measured out. Everything was like, to our specs to make sure the house would fit well. And it fit, pretty much perfectly, which was great. But, the Aster being two pieces is a little more challenge as far as, get everything to come together. I think there's one tolerance that I recall we noticed on our first build, the Ailing, where, I think the drywall, like on the ceiling where the two, halves of the house come together, I think they were like the tiniest hair, like longer than it should have been, like, which, almost couldn't even perceive it with your eye, but like, in hindsight, we should have like taken a saw and like shaved off enough to like, because I think we basically wanted the drywall to literally butt together. And we've since learned, just leave off a foot of drywall on either side of that. We call it the marriage line in the middle. And then you can like just do that 2-foot strip in the middle once it gets to the job site and just, do a little bit of mudding, taping, sanding, painting, because like that little bit of intolerance there, like that 1/4 inch either side, the house was like just not quite coming together. And our set crew, the guys who ultimately rent the crane and, pick it up and set it and get it all brought together, they were like, they call them come-alongs. It's like a winch. They were like winching the house together, like it's just not going together. It's so close. And then we went inside and looked. We're like, oh, that drywall. It's like that little bit of drywall just like was barely hanging it up like by like a 1/4 inch or like a 1/2 inch. So it's little things like that, these tolerances that, it's kind of trial and error where you learn over time. Like, okay, don't finish this part so close, like leave it a gap so you can have some finesse to kind of like finish it in the field, so there's, as an architect, my dream originally for like, our pods was to, for example, like try to finish as close to you as we could to that kind of marriage line and leave off like just a little bit of piece to like trim it out. But like ultimately, there's a reason why most modular manufacturers and builders like leave a little bit more tolerance, because like nothing's perfect, right? Like you want to dream that you could get it exact with like, you're picking up a 30,000 pound piece of a house, setting it next to another 30,000 piece with a crane, like to get it within like 1/8 of an inch, like that's pretty damn good. But like, if you move pieces of a house to get them perfect is like a lot to ask,
Right. So let's talk about honeymoon cottage projects. This was, I guess, something that predated these pods. Was it a inspiration?
Well, actually, it's funny. This technically kind of came about, let's see, we wrapped up that project last summer, and we started design on it the previous. So it was almost like in conjunction with, frankly, like I think we started our pod division, like we started fabrication, I think in 2023, like early 2023. And we kind of like started dreaming about the pod division back in like 22, I want to say it was like, mid to late 22. But a lot of interest. So the honeymoon cottage, for some context, is a full custom build. It was a full, design build through Knickerbocker for a longtime client of ours who was like one of my favorite clients ever. But a lot of what we did for the honeymoon cottage, I think, was frankly informed by our pods, as far as like the honeymoon cottage is in essence like kind of 3 pods, like situated with like these connecting bridge elements to take what is a living, kitchen, dining pod, and then a bedroom pod and a bathroom pod, all interconnected with these floating bridges. And even the windows in the honeymoon cottage, I ultimately selected those windows, which are also triple glazed, very energy efficient windows. They're made domestically here in the States, but it was only because of my extensive research into windows that we're going to use on prefab that I even thought to use windows like that on the honeymoon, because they had both got a quick lead time, which was great. You could get huge glass, which, a lot of American manufacturers, you can't get super wide glass. It seemingly only comes out of like a European style window. So there are a fair amount of details in the honeymoon cottage that actually were born out of prefab, interestingly.
Interesting. Wow. Well, that's the kind of way I want to live, of modular units and bridges between them, and maybe some tree houses.
Yep.
I mean, I can imagine that kind of living off grid in Maine. Oh, sounds amazing.
Pretty sweet. Yeah.
With such an incredible landscape all around you. So then, so I would imagine there's like, some of these tight coastal or historic sites. Is good, like, topographic design useful for you guys, like as built of the landscape, the ADA slopes, the datum, porch setback, all that kind of stuff. Is that ever of use for you?
Totally, 100%. It's funny you mentioned. I actually had the same client that was for the honeymoon cottage. A couple years prior to the honeymoon cottage, we'd started scheming with them about like some guest cottages, near their main cottage. There's a piece of land that actually their main cottage was on, but like kind of uphill from where their cottage was, that had this beautiful kind of rocky outcropping, a lot of exposed ledge and like kind of, nooks and crannies and rock outcroppings. And this client loves to do super exciting, fun architecture like you see in the honeymoon cottage. So we kind of started dreaming with them about what if we like perched a couple of these cottages like on the rock, like growing out of, the rock. And frankly, actually the honeymoon cottage itself is actually almost like a kind of carryover from that original design that I did. I did some kind of treehouse designs for them with a similar kind of like small footprint foundation that kind of grows into a larger footprint building, basically. So it almost looks like it's a, perched up on top of a plinth. But in that scenario, we actually engaged with I think they had a Boston, maybe a survey company, kind of like your company, that did like a full 3D mapping of that whole hillside. Because we had like, we had 2D like LiDAR topography, and we're like, we really need to see like what this is going to feel like in 3D. Because like from our experience, like topo is one thing, just 2D, but like to get that real 3D mapping would be amazing to have a 3D model with all like the outcroppings of rock and ledge where that sticks out to really like better map out this whole project. So I did that on a job very successfully. And I mean, in general too, like, we're always looking to get, pretty accurate, topographical maps of our projects. We have in-house landscape architects who that's like their roadmap to like have a good design, like a really good set of LiDAR topography to like understand existing slopes and grades, how to like move surface water, how to like rework the grades to make the, project work, etc. So we're always looking to, get really good data at the early onset to make sure our projects
I'd love
the
to talk
best.
to you about that offline, and maybe talk to some of your landscape architects about it.
Totally.
So just another note, factory precision fails if the site is wrong. So Scan to Plan captures existing conditions with terrestrial LiDAR. We deliver clean, spec-driven BIM, so your setouts, utilities, and craning clearances fit the first time. We tailor deliverables to your details and approval packets, and we move fast without trading accuracy. The measure of excellence is our standard, and if you're not fully satisfied, we cheerfully refund your money. So if prefab is your product, let Capture be your advantage. Search for Scan2Plan at scan2plan.io. So let's shift over to talking about, tools and technology.
Sure.
How, maybe just getting back to modeling landscapes, how does that model like change like a set out or foundation decision? What kind of downstream conflicts does that present?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, in Maine, we find ourselves, more often than not dealing with a lot of ledge. So like you dig down a foot, 18 inches on topsoil, up, and there's the rock, right? So we found rock. So basically, 9 out of 10 projects in Maine, we're removing ledge to like make room for a building, because a lot of our projects end up with basements or partial basements or crawl spaces. So, to understand topography also for sure helps us like understand, is a daylight basement an opportunity for this project, where you could take advantage of the grades to like not need to necessarily, like remove all that ledge, if part of it could be like a walkout basement, so we're definitely always, looking to have, that LiDAR kind of information readily available to help situate our buildings too, as far as like, how do we orient the building, what's that? Sorry. No, it's a podcast. Sorry about that. So yeah, basically, so like, it's all about kind of siting the building, right? Ultimately,
right,
for us, as far as topography. Yeah.
Right. I mean, another thing that we can do is, pull in accurate coordinate system and put that all into the point cloud. So essentially the point cloud is giving you an accurate elevation from sea level and all the accurate coordinates, which I would imagine is probably a factor in quite a few of your projects, coastal projects. Now you guys, you work in Revit mostly?
Mostly. Yeah.
And so, and you guys have been doing some like automation stuff in Revit? Or
I think I was telling you about that, where, we got a couple interesting plugins we've been working on with Revit. One is we're very much just dipping our toe in right now. It's called Glyph. I think I mentioned that to you, where one of my colleagues is like kind of our BIM specialist, and he's super sharp dude. And he's always kind of, snooping around the internet to find out what's the latest and greatest as far as like, tools that we could use to be more efficient. So yeah, I think Glyph is a software plugin for Revit that basically can help to, kind of automate part of the process as far as, setting up parameters and then like adding dimension strings, adding window and door tags, things that otherwise a human would sit there for 40 hours just kind of slogging through a plan set to like add all this information. But, we're looking at using that tool to really expedite, parts of our design process to cut down on design time, so that's a exciting tool we're looking into. We also have a plugin for Revit that we've been using in our prefab shop to generate shop drawings, so like, for us to build very efficiently in our shop, like, well, let me step back and say custom construction, right? We usually issue, floor plans, elevations, schedules, that sort of thing. And then usually the carpentry crew, they have to kind of sit down and as a team do a bunch of math, draw stuff out on paper, right? To like figure out, okay, I know what the window rough opening is. I know where the window is located. Now we got to figure out how to frame this wall to make all that work. So let's just like plan that out, right? So like we've been using this shop drawing software, which is a plugin for Revit, which basically says, set up the parameters. We want 24-inch on center spacing. We want single top plate, single bottom plate. Here's our parameters for our window and door openings, and then you click on a wall and say, please do this wall, go. And just kind of like spit out like a first attempt at like spacing all the studs. And then I'll give you a cut list too for all like the lengths and stuff like that. It takes a little bit of human intervention, like most softwares do these days, to like just double check and make sure something's not glaringly wrong. But it's pretty slick, a way to kind of like get us these, robust drawings we can then pass to our shop floor to just like have a shopping list to go cut all these pieces, label them, bring them to the, assembly line, and then put the walls together and the floors and the ceilings and that sort of thing. So it's pretty slick.
Amazing. Wow. Are there any, let's say new pieces of technology that you're consciously avoiding, or that people are always telling you should use and you say, no, I don't do that?
Interesting question. Yeah, I feel like, it's funny. I had a client recently, one of my favorite clients ever, new project with them, super excited. And we had like kind of a kickoff meeting, and this client, he's a savvy dude. He like, has a pretty good idea of what he wants programmatically as far as the building, already has a sense of the style he wants. But, this is a client that I've done now like 5-6 projects with. They're amazing and, super fun to work with. But he said like, oh, in this first meeting, he said, I used ChatGPT and I like plugged in what I wanted for program and like the look, and here's an image. Like, this is I'm like, oh boy, you just did my job for me. Uh-oh. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's cool. That looks cool. I was like, uh-oh, like it's a matter of time maybe before like, we got to, learn to control the machine and not be ousted by the machine. Because like he literally took 30 seconds, said, I want a 3-bed, 2-bath house, 2 stories. I want this style with this, enter. And it gave him like 3 options in renderings. I was like, those are pretty good renderings. Uh-oh. So I personally, as an architect would steer clear, I think, from using something like that, because that, I think very much takes away like the creative input of like the architect and the human. I think also what something like that wouldn't have, at least now, I think the wherewithal to, foresee is like design details that may impact other things along the way. Like, so when I design a house, like I'm trying to, the best of I can, even if it's very schematically, think about the wall systems, the HVAC systems I'm going to use, where things are going to be run. Like, I think AI, I think is far from getting that advanced to like design something that looks great, but also like has been thought through as far as like how to make the house work, basically.
Yeah.
So
right.
I would steer clear of that for now, personally, until maybe someday those kinks are figured out. But yeah, so like that's one thing that I think I would steer clear of.
The problem with those tools is like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Can't unsee it. Exactly.
Same with the writing. It's like once you read it, you can't unhear it. So it's like it's so easy to just approach something when you have no ideas at all and just say, give me an idea.
Exactly.
And then it's almost like the whole context window of everything you're doing has all been shifted.
Yeah, it taints the creative process, right? 100%. It taints the creative process. Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. I think it's the sort of thing that, if you need to like iterate on something once you've deeply ideated exactly what you're doing, it might be useful. But
yeah.
So what's I would imagine, you're in this very bespoke world and you're a champion for these prefab pods, right? So you're probably always saying no to personalization and different bespoke details that people want, right? So I mean, what's your rule for saying no?
Yeah, I'd say my rule in prefab for saying no generally is like, is it going to significantly impact how the production floor operates, right? So like if a client says, oh, you gave me 3 options for an engineered hardwood floor, I don't like any of them, but I found this one that I like that you could buy here. It's the exact same thickness, exact same install process as what, you guys are offering. Can we use that? I'd often say, sure. Sure. I had a client recently up in Rockland that, the design on paper, with the front door kind of at like, the center of the house, they said, for our project, we want to take one of your Lupine pods, set it up on a 2-car garage with, like a roof deck off the back, but that then would put the front door 10 feet off the ground. That doesn't make sense for us. Like, so can we like take what is that front door and actually move it over to the kitchen side and swap out what is a very tall, technically window, make that the front door and put a smaller window where the front door is? And I kind of talked to my shop manager. I said, hey man, grand scheme of things, that's not a huge change, right? Because like the door becoming a window, you just like frame a little sill, infill. It's like not a huge deviation. And then same thing for switching that window to a door. It's already pretty much door size. We just like tweaked that a little bit. Like it's not a big change, right? So we were able to agree like that's not going to be impactful enough. We have to like totally redesign, rethink everything. It's like a simple enough change. So that's kind of where I draw the line is if a client says like, oh, can I move all the walls inside? I'm like, nah, no, because like that's because as a modular manufacturer, we have what's called a third-party inspection process where we just submit our drawings in advance to this inspector who has to review them. That takes weeks. They have to stamp it. It takes structural calculations, all that. So it's not as easy as just changing something. It's like a weeks long process for us to like draw things, submit them for approvals, get stamps, So it really just kind of like messes up the efficiency where everything else on our website is pre-approved pretty much. So we don't have to like go through the rigmarole of getting it like recertified. So that's kind of where we draw the line best we can, where it's like not too much of a structural or like production line, kind of like change basically.
Yeah. Well, so you're offering what I think would be a fantasy for a lot of people, including myself, to have some kind of off-grid cabin in Maine that was, completely self-sufficient and obviously biophilic, as you guys like to say. Now, so what would grid optional be for a main pod, right? And what design changes and what regulation shifts would make that real?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so that was part of, my and our team's dream very early on, was like we were envisioning and, hoping for a future where, maybe this is still, a possibility where, there's a development of these pods and they could all be kind of like off grid basically in their own kind of like self-sustaining community where, you have solar, right? So like all these homes have been designed to be solar ready, where they have, a conduit run, up through the walls. You could easily get, solar from the roof down into, the crawl space, then hooked up to a transfer switch and then the electrical panel. I've already been talking quite a bit extensively to local, companies here in Maine that do like, solar and battery installation. So to kind of pair like a power wall or some other similar battery storage kind of element, to make this kind of off-grid living like possible. And I think being all electric obviously is the way to do that, right? Where you're not relying on, say, propane or natural gas to fuel your stove or your fireplace or whatever. So yeah, that's my dream, is, having these poised as already all electric. The goal and hope is that more folks moving forward with the kind of grid, having its issues as far as more people electrifying, the grid gets strained, more blackouts, more brownouts, more storms with climate change, the grid growing down because we can't keep up fast enough to get everything underground, everything's still above ground, So I see a future very soon where more clients are just out of the gate saying, I don't want to be on the grid. How can I do that? Because it just makes so much sense. And you're in control of your own destiny at that point. Like you don't have to rely on, like a supplier, I just got another recent email that my electric bill is going up another like 30% this year, and it went up like 25% last year. I'm like, oh my god, like, yeah, we have to cover our costs for grid maintenance. I'm like, since I bought the house, my electric bill has gone up like 200% in like 8 years. I'm like, that's crazy. Like, so to be in control of that and have your own means of production, I think is the way of the future for sure.
Also, I imagine it opens up about 80% of the state that otherwise wouldn't even be able to be developed. Right.
Totally. I mean, right. Yeah. Because Maine's a lot of woods. It's a lot of woods.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I see a world too where I think we talked about this in our little kind of intro call where, I think they're doing this in Japan. Actually, I read about this in my grad school studies, where it's pretty cool. They have, back charging electric car chargers, which I think it's coming online in the States more, but I think maybe like, regulations and, special interest groups have made it not easy to do. In Japan, you can literally plug in your electric car. Once it's fully charged, it can backfeed into the grid to like help power the grid, because it's a battery just sitting there with energy, right?
Sure.
I could see the same being said for any and all homes that have like electric, batteries and stuff in them, where if we do enough of them, like each home becomes, one battery cell in a larger grid of cells that could like feed the grid wherever it needs to be fed in time of need, like, so I think the challenge is, again, special interests don't want that to happen. So it might be a ways out, but like that to me is the future of like, energy independence and how to make the world more green and sustainable,
Yeah, well, I think we need building systems to become intelligent. Just as there's been a massive revolution. When people talk about AI now, they're really just talking about words. They're talking about text-based AI, but really the next wave is going to be physical AI. And in order for physical AI, the foundation that needs to be laid there is intelligent space and intelligent building systems that have a semantic layer of what all these systems are. So I always say, building systems are far more easy to comprehend than language systems, because language systems so completely irregular. But
Right.
building systems all follow very logical
Rules. Yeah, exactly.
rules, and they follow the laws of physics. And
Right.
so I'm working on some research up here at Rensselaer about kind of what it's going to take to develop this semantic layer for building systems, so that when that happens, though, at some point, I mean, I think buildings may actually have their own intelligences. I mean,
Right.
you have AI agents now. I think, the building of the future may have an AI agent that just is basically like an intelligence that goes along with the building. And then I think those intelligences, once they're able to be standardized, can actually trade that energy back and forth. They're basically opens up all kinds of new ideas for energy markets, energy trading, and sort of like communities that can sort of form their own grids off grid, right?
Yep. You're speaking my language. I love that, Owen. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I think we're about to wrap up here. What's coming up next for Knickerbocker? What do you see? What's exciting for you in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. I mean, frankly, I dream about our prefab division and how and where it will grow, and evolve. We started, with this kind of ADU market that we were targeting because, the need is there, as far as Maine is 80,000+ housing units short from its goals for 2030. I think most other places in the country are similarly like way behind where they should be for the amount of housing they need. So that was kind of our first foray into prefab, was with this kind of modular division with these small scale homes. But like, I think, and hope that Knickerbocker will continue to grow our prefab division and how we, collaborate with other prefab companies in the state. There's a lot of, amazing other prefab outfits in the state, that are doing cutting edge stuff as well. So, I see us as a company, having our prefab division grow and expand and, move into different sects. And, we talked about panelization too of some of our custom builds, so, we're looking to, for sure help meet demands and, build better, faster, more efficiently, get costs down by way of prefab. So that's where I see, our prefab division going, and the Knickerbocker Group in general. I mean, I think we are always just looking to, help our clients with their dreams, build a beautiful home. And I'm hopeful that our prefab division can help, with the custom home side of things too, to kind of, again, deliver buildings faster and more efficiently, to kind of keep costs down.
I imagine it's a great feedback loop. It's kind of really got to be really interesting to have those two divisions, because there's probably so much you're learning with the pods that can be applied into the bespoke work and vice versa.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, our pod division, we kind of realized pretty quickly that it's an incubator of sorts that we found is like, we're trying out kind of newer cutting edge products in prefab that, might not have worked for custom, or, might have been an upcharge in custom, or the construction team wasn't comfortable trying something new, but we tried out in prefab. And then we realized this is pretty slick. This new wall stud we're using actually checks a lot of boxes for energy efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. So we're definitely finding it as a great means of trying out new products and methodologies and systems that we can then take to our parent company, which has been great.
Wow. Well, Julien, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a really interesting conversation. Thanks to Julien Jalbert and the Knickerbocker Group. You can see more of their prefab work at knickerbockergroup.com. And please subscribe and share Practice Forward with all of your friends and colleagues. We have new episodes weekly. And so today's episode was supported by Scan-to-Plan. It's terrestrial LiDAR and Scan-to-BIM. We're the measure of excellence, so you can focus on design. So thanks so much, Julien. And
thanks, Owen. It's great being here. Appreciate it.
Hope to make it out there and have a lobster roll or something soon.
Yeah, that'd be great. Come on down.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Right,
once again, Julien Jalbert, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you very much. I had a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. See you next time.